A man named Nicholas Dunn went to a bar to meet his twin sister Margot. Today is his and his wife Amy's 5th wedding anniversary, but Nick is not at all happy about this event. Meanwhile, Amy is recording in her diary how she met her future husband Nick at a party in 2005. He turned out to be a very charismatic and charming guy. Amy fell in love at first sight. The young people decided to leave the party to get to know each other better. As it turned out, they were both journalists. This was the beginning of their beautiful romance. In the present, Nick continues to complain to Margot about life. He is sure that Amy as usual will have her favorite game, treasure hunt, to celebrate the anniversary. This annoys Nick. However, when he returned home, he didn't find his wife, and the room was a mess. Of course, Nick was very scared and immediately called the police. After a few minutes, officers arrived and examined the house, asking Nick several questions. Detective Rhonda Boney saw pictures from a popular children's book in Amy's personal room and realized that the missing woman is none other than Super Amy. On February 24, 2007, Amy and her boyfriend attended another party organized by her parents. The entire elite gathered here. Amy hates the heroine of the book invented by her parents. Super Amy was cheerful and successful, unlike the prototype who constantly disappointed her parents. The father convinces Amy to talk to the press and bloggers. She doesn't want to, but her parents insist very much. It seems that Nick is the only one who understands and supports Amy. So when he proposed to her in public, she agreed without hesitation. In the present, Nick was taken to the police station. Detective Boney told Nick that forensic scientists are working in his house now, so he will have to find temporary accommodation. The police have every reason to believe that this is a crime. Nick has not yet fully realized the seriousness of the situation. The detective asked Nick a few more questions and concluded that he knows almost nothing about his wife's life. Also, Rhonda found it strange that according to Nick, Amy had no friends at all. Nick immediately came under police suspicion. When Nick saw his father, who it turned out had run away from the nursing home, a scandal broke out. Nick was unhappy that the police did not inform him about this right away. Eventually, he took his father away from here. On July 5, 2009, Amy and Nick, having been married for 2 years, felt like the happiest people on the planet. Their relationship was perfect. In the present, Nick went to his sister Margot and told her everything that happened. Margot never liked Amy, but in spite of everything, she is very worried about her. Meanwhile, Detective Boney was approached by Noelle Hawthorne, who introduced herself as Amy's best friend. Detectives and forensic scientists are carefully examining the Dunn's house for clues. It turned out that the house, car and even Nick and Margot's bar are registered to Amy. In one of the drawers was found an envelope with the first clue from the alleged criminal. In the present, Nick and Margot arrived at the police station, as did Amy's parents. They believe that by combining efforts, they can find Amy. A press conference was held. Nick and Amy's parents spoke to reporters and asked anyone who has any information about her whereabouts to respond. Nick feels clearly uncomfortable and does not know how to behave. Later, he and Amy's mother and father again spoke with Detective Boney. The parents told that 20 years ago Amy dated Desi Collings During, who wanted to harm himself after the breakup. The family even had to go to court. This is not the only ex-boyfriend of Amy's who didn't want to let her go. The parents provided the police with a lot of useful information, unlike Nick, who knows almost nothing about his wife's past. Later, Detective Boney showed Nick an envelope with the word clue. Nick assured that this has nothing to do with the disappearance, it was just that his wife liked to organize a treasure hunt game for each of their anniversaries. Detective Boney asked Nick to decipher the clue, hoping that this will help them track Amy's movements the day before her disappearance. This led the man and the detective to Nick's private room, to the second clue, which mentioned a certain lodge. Nick lied to the detective that he had no idea what it means. In fact, that very night he visited this lodge, which belonged to his father. Here Nick found the third clue, but Detective Boney had followed him. Nick lied that he comes here every week to check if everything is okay. According to Nick, this place has nothing to do with Amy's clue. He didn't mention the third note, but the detective still suspected something was wrong. On July 18, 2010, Amy writes in her diary about problems in their marriage. Both Nick and Amy lost their jobs. In addition, the publishing house terminated the contract with her parents, and now they want to take money from their daughter's fund. Amy agreed without consulting her husband. Of course, he didn't like it, but Amy reminded him that initially these were her parents' money, as Super Amy was their idea. Nick spends the remaining savings on video games, gadgets and other unnecessary things. Of course, Amy is displeased with this. That's why the spouses often quarrel. That day, Amy overheard her husband talking on the phone with some girl. At that moment she realized that it was only going to get worse. In the present, 2 days have passed since Amy's disappearance. Amy's parents organized a meeting of volunteers who are ready to participate in the search for their daughter. One guy seems suspicious to Nick, but Detective Boney assured that they have everything under control. She's interested if Nick is familiar with Noelle Hawthorne, a mother of 3, who was Amy's best friend. Nick said that she is their neighbor, but not a friend. The police are increasingly suspecting Nick of involvement in what happened, although they have no evidence yet. When Nick tried to call someone, he was approached by a girl who introduced herself as Shauna Kelly. She is a volunteer participating in the search for Amy. Nick didn't want to talk to her, but Shauna took a selfie with him without asking for permission. Nick insisted that Shauna delete the photo, but she refused. Mary Beth, Amy's mother, was furious because Nick was behaving as if all of this was a game to him. But Nick said that he was just trying to be polite to the people who wanted to help. In reality, he's living a nightmare. Dozens of volunteers are combing the area in search of Amy, while detectives continue to look for leads in the Dunn's house. Noelle Hawthorne came again, demanding to speak with Detective Boney. However, an officer asked her colleagues to remove this woman from the possible crime scene. The news reported that during the press conference about Amy's disappearance, her husband was smiling as if nothing had happened. Margot asked the brother if there was anything he hadn't told her. Nick assured her that he had nothing to hide. The public is putting pressure on him while he is in constant stress. On September 23, 2010, the couple moved from New York to Missouri. They have no money, no jobs, and no prospects. Moreover, Nick's mother is seriously ill. This is why they moved. Nick was happy to be home, while Amy feels like an outsider here. Amy feels that if she disappears, her husband won't even notice. In the present, a beautiful girl named Andy Fitzgerald, who turns out to be his mistress, comes to Nick. It was very risky for them to meet because Margot is in the next room, and reporters are constantly following Nick. Nick asked Andy not to tell anyone about their relationship and his plan to divorce. They should not see each other in the near future. On October 2, 2011, Nick's mother passed away. The money from the sale of the house in New York was used by Amy to buy a bar for her husband. For now, he just takes the money and brings nothing in return. Amy feels that her husband doesn't need her anymore. They are drifting apart, and Nick is constantly going out to meet his friends. But Amy knows he's lying to her. When Amy said she wanted to have a baby, Nick reacted very badly. Before leaving, he said a child would not help them save their marriage. In the present, Detective Boney and her partner are inspecting abandoned buildings, showing local vagrants and ex-convicts a picture of Amy. A guy named Jason said he had seen this woman. She allegedly wanted to get a gun. This was on Valentine's Day. On February 14, 2012, Amy wrote in her diary about her intention to buy a gun. She knows that her husband wants a divorce, but doesn't dare because according to the prenup, he won't get any property. Probably, Nick wants her to disappear. In the present, 3 days have passed since Amy disappeared. In the morning, Margot noticed Andy leaving Nick. Margot can't believe that her brother has been deceiving them all. Nick tried to justify himself, saying that his life with Amy was unbearable. Each time returning home, he dreamed of running away. Margot considered this excuse pathetic. In her opinion, he is in a very vulnerable position. Right now, every channel is blazing about Amy's husband flirting with other women, citing the photograph with the volunteer as proof. Margot believes that the only way out is to hire a lawyer. Soon Nick returned home, left alone with this situation. Forensics was still working in his yard. Meanwhile, the detectives ponder every possible theory. According to the expert opinion, someone broke into the Dunn's house and took Amy. Perhaps it was her husband. In the evening, Nick joined the people who had gathered to support Amy's family. The terrible tragedy united all the townspeople. Nick gave a speech, assuring that he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance and was ready to do everything possible to bring her back. Suddenly Noelle Hawthorne loudly stated that Amy was pregnant and that her husband was somehow involved in what happened to her. This shocked everyone present. Journalists chased Nick all the way to his car. Later he told the detectives that he knew nothing about his wife's pregnancy and that Noelle Hawthorne is just crazy. Then Detective Boney provided him with pictures of Noelle and Amy together. This proves that they are friends. Also, the detective believes that all signs point to the house burglary being staged. Probably there was a struggle, and so far all the evidence points to Nick. He was shocked to learn that there is $117,000 of debt on his credit card. Looking at the account printout, Nick assured that he didn't buy all this. Receiving a call from the hospital, Detective Boney confirmed that Amy was pregnant. Nick was not at all happy about this news and refused to answer further questions without a lawyer. Reporters are constantly near Nick's house. When Margot came, Nick told her that Amy was not who she pretended to be. But Margot can't trust anymore. Nick realized that even his own sister suspects him of Amy's disappearance. Left alone, Nick pulled out the envelope with the third clue. Meanwhile, the detectives are exploring that very lodge. Boney is convinced that Amy is no longer alive. Her husband was the only one with motives. While Nick was deciphering the clue, the detectives went down to the basement and found Amy's diary in the stove. Judging by the entries, Amy was unhappy in her marriage and didn't feel safe, considering her husband capable of crime. After guessing where the wife's clue was leading, Nick went into the garage and found a gift from her. Meanwhile, Amy, who has actually secretly run away from everyone, is heading to another state. In this way, she wants to take revenge on her selfish, lazy husband who will soon go to prison. To stage her disappearance, Amy befriended their pregnant neighbor Noelle, convincing her that Nick was cruel and unpredictable. Of course, Noelle believed all her words. Also, Amy made sure there was a huge debt on the husband's credit card and secretly bought a cheap car. Amy pretended to be pregnant to elicit even more sympathy from Noelle. Amy used Noelle's pregnancy test results to convince doctors that she was expecting a baby. Now it officially is in her medical records. Then on their wedding anniversary, Amy staged the crime scene, but with some mistakes, to raise suspicions of the police. Now everything looks as if Nick tried carelessly to hide the evidence. In advance, Amy wrote 300 fake diary entries about her unhappy marriage. Amy purposely burnt the diary not completely so the police would find it. It was the perfect crime. Now the whole world will hate Nick and think he's involved in his wife's disappearance. First thing, Amy changed her appearance to look like an unsightly woman. She only pays in cash. Soon Amy rented a room in a motel, where no one would ever find her. She is aware of the husband's infidelity and is determined to ruin his life. Meanwhile, Nick came to his sister and convinced her to go to the garage, where everything that Amy bought with his credit card is located. Of course, the police are convinced that it was Nick who spent all the money. Finally, the brother and sister unpacked Amy's farewell gift. The note hinted that her husband would soon go to prison. Margot realized that Nick was right about Amy. She had everything planned. Amy now lives under the name Nancy and has met her eccentric neighbor Greta. 2 more days passed. Amy keeps up to date with current news about her disappearance. It amuses her. Amy told Greta and her friend Jeff the true story about how some time ago she saw her husband with another woman. She didn't want to believe the betrayal for a long time. Nick turned to lawyer Tanner Bolt and told him the whole truth. Tanner thought his theory about the wife's revenge was crazy, but agreed to take on the case. However, for his services, Tanner charges $100,000. Tanner has a plan. They have to discredit Amy in any way possible in the eyes of the public. Nick said there is a man named Tommy O'Hara. 8 years ago, Amy filed a lawsuit against him. Soon Nick met with Tommy, who Amy accused of inappropriate actions towards her. After that, Tommy was convicted, and because of that he hasn't been able to find a job for the last 8 years. Amy saw on the news how Noelle talked about the miserable life of her best friend and her complicated relationship with the husband. However, Greta, unsuspecting that the missing woman was sitting next to her on the couch right now, said that Amy deserved it. In her opinion, Amy was arrogant, like all rich women. Nick called his sister and said that he had made arrangements with Tanner. Margot promised to help him with money. Together they will find a way out of this situation. Amy is happy because she got what she wanted. Now everyone hates her husband and considers him guilty. In the meantime, Nick visited Desi Collins, Amy's ex-boyfriend, who loved her to madness. After their breakup, he stalked Amy for a long time, forcing her family to go to court. Desi made it clear that he was not going to talk to Nick, and did not let him into the house. Tanner believes that they should tell the police about Andy. The detectives will find out about it sooner or later anyway, and it will be better if Nick is honest. Meanwhile, Amy is playing golf with Greta and Jeff. Suddenly, she accidentally dropped her money. That's how the neighbors realized she was lying about not having a penny. At night, Amy heard strange noises and went out to check. After that, she locked the door. Reporters still surround Nick's house. Tanner convinced him to tell the world about Andy on the show tomorrow. First everyone will hate him, and then forgive him when they understand that he admitted his mistake and feels guilty about his wife. Thus people will start to sympathize with him. Amy was wiping her fingerprints everywhere when there was a knock on the door. It was Greta and Jeff. Amy let them into the room, not expecting that they came to rob her. Amy threatened to call the police, but Greta realized that this woman is not named Nancy and that she is not who she claims to be. So Greta and Jeff knew for sure she wouldn't call the police. They stole her money and left. Now Amy was left without a livelihood and screamed in desperation. That same night, she drove off, and stopping at a gas station, called the only person who would be ready to help her now. Nick is rehearsing his speech before the show. Tanner gave him some useful tips on how to elicit sympathy from the audience. Nick must make everyone believe he loves his wife. Amy met in a bar with Desi Collins, who had loved her all these years. Amy put on a show, saying she ran away from her cruel husband and didn't want anyone to know where she was. Of course, Desi believed every word she said. Nick was introduced to Sharon Schieber, a popular TV host. Soon Amy saw Andy, who was dressed very modestly, say on live television that she was deeply ashamed of having a relationship with a married man. Amy was furious with such hypocrisy. After that, it was Nick's turn to answer Sharon's questions. He was very nervous but handled himself. After the show, Tanner advised Nick not to show himself in public places for now, as all the women in the country still hate him. Desi brought Amy to his luxurious country house and promised that from now on, he would take care of her. Desi was very happy that his beloved was finally with him. He assured her that she was safe here, as there were surveillance cameras everywhere. The next day while Desi was away, Amy found where exactly the surveillance cameras were located. Soon Desi returned, who bought his beloved clothes, cosmetics and other necessities. Finally, there was an episode on TV with Nick's performance. Amy and Desi also watched this. Nick was very convincing when he said he was a bad and unfaithful husband, but he regrets it and really wants to find his wife. Desi didn't want to hear this anymore and turned off the TV. Meanwhile, Margot read comments on the internet. The public opinion has now changed. Everyone sincerely sympathizes with Nick. That same evening, Detective Boney came to Margot's house with a search warrant. The thing is, they received a call from an anonymous person who allegedly saw a suspicious man here. But the police have no idea that this anonymous was Amy. In the garage, the officers found all the things bought with Nick's card. This finally convinced the police that Nick and Margot were accomplices. They were arrested. Meanwhile, Desi confessed his feelings to Amy. He had waited for this moment for 20 years. Nick is being interrogated. Detective Boney showed him Amy's diary and other evidence. Nick tried to convince the police that most of these entries are lies. However, these clues were enough to arrest Nick. 21 days have passed since Amy disappeared. She returned her hair color, pretending that she enjoys Desi's company. He felt absolutely happy next to her. When he left for work, Amy staged as if he had been keeping her in the house the whole time. The records from surveillance cameras will make her lie perfect. Tanner bailed Nick and Margot. Crowds of journalists were waiting for them on the street. Everyone considers Nick and Margot guilty. 29 days have passed since Amy disappeared. She continues her game to compromise Desi. In the evening, unsuspecting Desi returned home. Amy confessed her love to him to lull vigilance. Desi had no idea that this day would be his last, as a sharp object was hidden under the pillow. The next morning Amy was saved. Nick is one of the few who knows that his wife staged all this. Doctors and detectives unconditionally believed Amy's story that on that fateful morning she heard a knock on the door. It was Desi, who came to take her. According to her, Nick is absolutely not involved here. Detective Boney is the only one who doubts the truthfulness of her words. The conversation with Nick planted doubts in her. Nick brought his wife home, even though he knew she was dangerous. Now Nick can't even leave Amy, because if he does, the press will destroy him. Amy has started playing the role of a loving wife. Their story is now the most talked about, and Nick and Amy are constantly getting invitations to shows. They are now famous. Detective Boney knows the truth, but she has no evidence. Moreover, thanks to this fuss, their family has become rich. The officers were forced to close the case. At home, Amy promised her husband that she would never hurt him. However, he must keep their secret. 7 weeks have passed. Nick rehearses a speech in front of the mirror, intending to tell the truth about his wife in today's interview. She in turn wants him to admit to the credit card expenses. Nick was determined to tell the truth, but before the interview, Amy told him about her pregnancy. She used her husband's biomaterial from the clinic to make it happen. Nick horrifically realized that now he would have to stay with Amy forever for the sake of the child. Coming out to the journalists, Nick continued to play his role. Later upon learning about this, Margot cried. The woman understands that her brother is in danger next to Amy, but she can't help him. In the interview, Nick talked about how happy he and his wife are. No one around suspects that Nick is trapped. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.